Hi, I'm Jeremy.
Hi, I'm Kaylee.
And I'm Jeremy. And when we're not checking our closet for monsters, we're hosting a paranormal comedy podcast. It's called According to an Idiot.
Do you want a disturbing tale you can tell all your friends around a campfire, and everyone wants to invite you to their campfires because they know you as the cool campfire tale guy? Well, guess what? We got good news for you.
Each episode, we explore the unexplained.
Conspiracy theories.
Urban legends.
Cryptids.
Scary ghosts.
I mean, I'll teach you something for sure. Is it useful? No. But you'll know some fun party facts.
However, if you're listening to our podcast, you probably aren't invited to a lot of parties.
That's very true.
So if you like getting scared, put us in your ear holes and take a nosedive into the unknown.
That's good.
According to an Idiot. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Nazi scientists, some of them tied to war crimes, including horrific concentration camp experiments, brought to the U.S. in a secret program to advance American security interests during the Cold War. It sounds like the plot of a film drama, but it actually happened, and on a large scale.
Trying to figure out how to start this one. Well, all right.
Do you want to talk a little bit before, or do you want to just go ahead and get into it?
I kind of just want to get into it because I keep having people say stuff to me about how they started listening, and we talked about farming for 15 minutes, and then I'm like, okay, that's dramatic. And Steve, I'm talking to you if you're listening to this. But regardless, okay, hey everybody, it's Creeper Reel. I'm Ashley. There's Bianca over there.
Hi.
I don't know why that's so funny, but she is over there. Here I am, over here.
Is that how that works?
Yeah. It's been a couple weeks since we brought you the conclusion of Black Eyed Kids because we got in over our heads a little bit with Operation Paperclip, which is what we are diving into today. And, okay, let's do it then. Bianca's just stunned silence right now because of all the notes that she sees before her. So, anyway, let's just get into it. Operation Paperclip. In the chaos following World War II, one of the most fucked up spoils of war were Germany's greatest scientific minds. The U.S. government covertly began a campaign to bring these morally reprehensible, brilliant minds to America to privately work for us without the public's knowledge, and they called it Operation Paperclip.
Initially, it was called Operation Overcast. It was later renamed to Operation Paperclip. It was a secret program of the Joint Intelligent Objectives, or JIOA, which was established in 1945.
What this project meant was that the U.S. found the benefits they could gain from these men's minds outweighed the awful crimes they committed in Nazi Germany.
It was initially intended to interview the scientists involved with the war, but what Major Staver, who was the chief of the Jet Propulsion Section of the Research and Intelligence Branch of the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps, learned during his interviews changed the entire premise of the operation.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
It is.
Similar to Project MK-Ultra, the Montauk Project, and others that we've discussed, the developments yielded from these projects is the reason they were utilized, and it begs the question, is there anything our government isn't willing to do to make progress? Whatever that may be.
The primary purpose, or at least what has been declassified to the public, was U.S. military advantage during the Cold War in the space race. And the Soviet Union was aggressive in forcibly recruiting more than 2,200 German specialists, a total of more than 6,000 people, which includes family members, with Operation Ozavakim during one night on October 22nd in 1946. And to kind of go on Ashley's question there, why did we choose to take the Nazis? Does it have anything? Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that the USSR was recruiting them at the same time?
For sure.
Were we just concerned that we would have another war, but this time with Germany and Russia working together?
Well, I mean, we needed the the knowledge if it was out there, I guess, is what they're going to say. I mean, obviously,
Right.
I see both sides, and obviously we'll talk about it more in depth later,
For sure.
but, it's kind of tough because it's morally reprehensible, but also, is it necessary so that we're not obliterated? I don't know, maybe.
Like, do the ends justify the means kind of a question?
It's hard to even say that necessarily because we're talking about, human lives that were taken. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, do we need these dark corners of society that we don't know about? I don't know. I don't know if it's justified necessarily, but is it necessary? And maybe
Right.
is the more appropriate way I would think to put it. So Hitler took power in early 1933, and it was only 2 months before he instituted a nationwide boycott of Jewish doctors, lawyers, and business professionals. This was followed a month later by the Reich's Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service, which made it illegal for non-Aryans to hold any civil service position, including all university positions throughout Germany, which, seriously, what the fuck? That was a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
One man this affected was a Jewish physician from Vienna, Dr. Leopold Armstrong. He would travel around the world working for various hospitals until he finally landed in Boston and eventually became a U.S. citizen. He was also deployed in World War II, and when the war with Germany was over, he was sent to interview German doctors to find out who was guilty and who was not. So during the war, physicians with the U.S. Army Air Force heard rumors of the Reich's cutting-edge research being developed by their aviation doctors. Whenever the Luftwaffe would publish any Nazi-sponsored medical publications, the U.S. would circumvent copyright laws and translate the work to English and publish it for their flight surgeons to study. So really we were already kind of using Nazi research and just giving it to our scientists in the first place, but there's only so far that can take you without actually getting them in your cold hands.
At the end of the war, 2 top U.S. Air Force officials, Major General Malcolm Groh and Colonel Harry Armstrong, hatched a plan to find and collect the top Luftwaffe physicians to entice them to come work for the United States. These men were physicians, flight surgeons, and aviation medical pioneers for the United States.
Major Leopold Alexander was a medical war crimes investigator and physician who was sent to Germany to find and interview Nazi physicians to determine whether they were guilty or innocent. One afternoon, one of the top medical officials on the Luftwaffe issues, Dr. Georg... forgive me, everybody. August Welz told Alexander that the Germans had developed a method of unfreezing a man to bring him back to life. He said that they had, which is, pretty cool stuff there. He said that they had developed a radical warming technique, and success was very dependent on precise body temperatures and the duration of rewarming per body weight. He said that the Luftwaffe Air Rescue had used this very technique during the war. Alexander, there to investigate war crimes, got straight to the point and asked if they had done these experiments on humans. Welz said that the experiments had been conducted on large animals, horses, cows, adult pigs, but never on humans to his knowledge. He said no, but he was acting a little cagey, so Alexander felt that there was more to the story than Welz was opening up about. As he interviewed man after man who had been working for the Third Reich, he found himself in a similar conundrum to the scientists. Did he arrest the men who were revealing bits and pieces of these horrors that the Nazis had committed, or did he continue to gather more and more information from them?
So he decided to press Welz further, and they went to tour various facilities where the research had been conducted. And at each facility, Welz suddenly revealed the rewarming experiments had been moved to yet another facility until they arrived to a facility in freezing. So your princess is at another castle.
Just constantly moving.
Yeah. As Welz showed Alexander the lab, they found pristine equipment to be able to conduct these experiments, but they were small and only capable of performing on small animals like mice. So eventually Alexander asked again, where had the large animal experiments taken place? Then Welz led him to the rear of the building into a separate shed located in the very back of the property and sheepishly pointed to 2 cracked wooden tubs. In a moment of horrifying clarity, Alexander realized the 2 tubs could not fit any horse, cow, or even an adult pig.
What these tubs could fit was a human being, he would later testify. So Alexander said that what he took away from all the interviews he conducted was that all of these men who were strong in their convictions that there was no human medical experimentation going on were all keeping this information from him pointedly. But without any admission of guilt, all he had were his suspicions. In a letter to his wife, he described what he felt German science had become under Nazi rule. This is what he said. German science presents a grim spectacle, grim for many reasons. First, it became incompetent, and then it was drawn into the maelstrom of depravity of which this country reeks. The smell of the concentration camps, the smell of violent death, torture, and suffering. German doctors were not practicing science, but really depraved pseudo-scientific criminality. In his investigation of crimes committed in the name of neuropsychiatry and neuropathology, he realized the abhorrent core of Nazi belief that had informed the practice of medicine under Hitler was that not only were all people not created equal, but that some people were not considered human at all. It's pretty horrible. As you may already know, to Nazi fuckheads, some people were considered subhuman, Untermenschen, I believe is how they say it, a designation that included Jews, Gypsies, homosexuals, Poles, Slavs, Russian POWs, the handicapped, the mentally ill, among others. And these people were no different than lab rats as far as what they felt was okay to do to them in their research.
According to Heinrich Himmler, the subhuman is a biological creature crafted by nature which has hands, legs, eyes, a mouth, even the semblance of a brain. Nevertheless, this creature is only partial human being. Not all those who appear human are in fact so.
Go fuck yourself, dude. Ugh, that is ridiculous. Okay. I mean, obviously, that's an understatement of the century. Okay, German citizens were told to buy this pseudoscience, and millions went along with it.
It's again that thing where you see something happening and you just nothing happens, so you're an accomplice. If you see something happening, you say nothing, you're a fucking accomplice to the goddamn situation. Sorry,
plus,
goddamn.
Plus, we're just talking about absolute just concentration camp horrors. Nothing big that kids can listen to. It's no big deal. But it's kind of like also if you look at those little experiments they'll do where people just follow suit, you know what I mean? Like somebody will just go, and I see that all the time in the city. It's like people will just start forming a line somewhere, and I'm like, where's this other? Where are y'all even going? And then I'm like, oh, this one's like open, and nobody even cares because everybody just wants
go with the flow.
It's easier to just be like, oh, I'm just gonna go with the flow of it. But I mean, I would hope that in this kind of situation that you can't go with the flow of treating human beings as though they aren't human beings. But I guess it happens, and, you know, I guess we do it in our cars every day. So who am I to talk? Not really, I am. I can say Nazis are shitheads, so. German physicians and doctors would use this pseudoscience to justify maiming and torturing, resulting in death in their experiments. And in the case of the handicapped and mentally ill, the Untermenschen, theory was used by German physicians to justify genocide. And Dr. Alexander was one of the first servicemen to learn that the Reich had first sterilized, then euthanized nearly its entire population of mentally ill persons, including tens of thousands of children, under, get this beautiful name, the Law for the Prevention of Genetically Diseased Offspring. Jesus. Now, this was kept a secret from the general public, even if it was quote-unquote justified by law. So on some level, I don't think people really understood the gravity of what was going on, perhaps, but holy shit.
At one point, ex-prisoners of the Dachau camp gave an interview on the Allied radio broadcast about what they endured there. They said that doctors had frozen people to death in tubs of ice-cold water to see if they could unfreeze them and be brought back to life. These experiments were meant to stimulate what Luftwaffe pilots would experience if they were shot down over the English Channel. At this, Alexander began to piece together that these experiments sounded very similar to the animal experience he had been told about. Was the Luftwaffe involved in the medical experiments in the concentration camps?
And just to be kind of clear here, the Luftwaffe is the German Air Force. So he's now trying to figure out if the the Air Force was involved in these Nazi experiments, and then, at the concentration camps, and then who else would perhaps be involved if that was the case? Oh, shit, I got ahead of myself.
No, that's
there.
fine.
Sorry. But I wanted to kind of clarify about the Luftwaffe, because I don't think we really had said it. Okay, so shortly after this, Alexander learned that there was an entire contents of Himmler's SS records that had been uncovered in a cave, which he had hidden but when the war was coming to an end. These documents would turn out to be the single most incriminating discoveries of the war.
All the doctors Alexander spoke to had the same story. A Dr. Rascher conceived and carried out these experiments, and he was now dead. But Himmler's documents told another story altogether. Rascher did conceive of the idea for medical experiments on the prisoners at concentration camps, but he was far from being the only doctor involved. Worse yet, the experiments were not only limited to the freezing ones they had disclosed, but they had also placed prisoners in a low-pressure chamber meant to simulate high altitude. In Himmler's docs, they found photographs documenting seemingly healthy young men before being strapped into a harness in this low-pressure chamber and exposed to explosive decompression. As he later described, what Alexander found in these photographs was essentially before, during, and after documentation of murder in the name of medicine.
That sounds so absolutely horrifying to me, to essentially be decompressed to death inside of this chamber.
I can't breathe. Thinking about that makes me want to breathe deeper. That's so sad. They're healthy young men, healthy men.
Well, I mean,
does it matter if they're healthy or ill? She shouldn't.
Right. Regardless, it's so horrifying. It's hard to even wrap my brain around it. There were photographs of German doctors holding men down in tubs of ice water while their body temperatures were recorded as they died. So this is just regular doctors. This isn't just like one man that did this all on his own. This is, tons of doctors documented in even photographs and in just paper documents having taken part in these, literally holding people down and killing them in tubs of ice water, putting them in these tanks, these pressure chambers. It's just, it was widespread. It wasn't just like a couple people. While many of the doctors Alexander had interviewed had claimed their innocence regarding these ghastly experiments, Himmler's papers named them repeatedly and were in direct contradiction to their claims, which I kind of already have said. Okay, after Dachau was liberated, 3 prisoners who had managed to stay alive stayed behind to help investigators piece together the war crimes. They created this committee for the investigation of SS medical crimes, and they learned that the experiments were conducted on Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, and Catholic priests, which may be the only one I can give them a pass on. Luftwaffe reports use the terms guinea pigs, large pigs, and adult pigs as code words for their human subjects.
Jesus Christ.
So Dr. Alexander also learned of a motion picture, quote unquote, of the experiments that had been shown at a private screening at the Air Ministry. So they essentially made a movie of the torture and I don't even want to call them science experiments, but experiments on these people to show as like a special screening with popcorn.
Jesus. So at the same time that Alexander was conducting his interviews, investigators for the U.S. Army Forces and Royal Air Force were coming to altogether different conclusions. They spoke with the doctors that Alexander had interviewed, but were completely uninterested in the wealth of information found in Himmler's files. Their purpose seemed to be to support the new Nazi doctor-filled research lab, and saying the doctors suffered greatly from isolation during the war, and that the information gleaned from their experiments was not much more than what the Allies already knew.
So they were just making excuses for him.
Yeah, dude.
Mm-hmm.
They were isolated.
Yeah, so that's why they just fell prey to these Nazis so easily.
That's crazy, dude. So they praised the doctors' benign research and gave them essentially glowing reviews in their reports, even taking special note of Elsa's freezing of a quote-unquote guinea pig, which, remember, is a human,
right? And
still recording a heartbeat for minutes after death. Cool.
Yeah, really awesome. they were also very interested in the experiments involving high-altitude parachute escapes, where it was written that they had gathered a bunch of information and produced studies in reversible and irreversible death, supposedly on rabbits, but I think we know the truth about that. These investigators from the Royal Air Force and the United States Air Force were just buying up the bullshit the Nazis were telling them, praising their efforts, and recommending them for the highest positions in their new research lab. Obviously, I feel like they were simply, paving the way for them to get these jobs, and I don't know if they even really cared to find out the truth, or if they were really just there to kind of pretend like they were actually doing some sort of investigation and make excuses for these people. It's kind of insane. These investigators deemed the men's political and ethical viewpoints to be insignificant in comparison to what they needed them for. They claimed their short-term use at the lab would far exceed the objectionable views they held or actions that they had taken during the war. During this time, many Nazi doctors would be quietly transitioned into positions working for the U.S. and British governments, while the less valuable doctors left behind would go to stand trial at Nuremberg. So that's cool.
At the home of German virus expert Eugen Hagen, thought to be the key developer in the secret Nazi biological weapons program and who had abandoned it only 24 hours prior, Dutch-American particle physicist Samuel Goudsmit and his two colleagues, bacteriological warfare experts Bill Cromarty and Fred Wardenberg, sat poring through Hagen's docs for hours. This was in late November of 1944 in Strasbourg, France, which was a town that had recently been liberated from the Nazis.
So that virus expert had fled his home because he didn't want to be getting in no trouble.
Mm-hmm. The war these men were waging was altogether different than that of the soldiers on the battlefield. These men were on the hunt to find Nazi science. This Nazi science was more advanced than that of the United States or our allies, and we wanted to get our grimy hands on it. This covert op initially went under the name Operation Alsos and was an offshoot of the Manhattan Project, which the Manhattan Project was our development of the atomic bomb, the atomic bombs. This was performed under the operation of determining just how close the Third Reich was to waging atomic, biological, or chemical warfare against the Allied troops, which was called ABC, Warfare by Alsos, and a lot of lives obviously depended on the success of the operation.
Just days prior to the men sitting in Hagen's apartment, they captured 4 of Hitler's top nuclear scientists and learned that the Nazis' atomic bomb project had been a failure. This was obviously a relief, but they had plenty of other shit to worry about, to be honest. So they spent hours pouring through Hagen's documents when suddenly Cromarty and Wardenberg exclaimed simultaneously. There, in seemingly harmless correspondence, not in code, nothing marked top secret, Hagen and his colleagues shared gossip amongst the usual memos. They were obviously never meant to be found by American scientists, as the plan was for the Third Reich to rule for 1,000 years. In one letter to a colleague at the University of Strasbourg, Dr. Hurt, dated November 15, 1943, wrote to Hagen the following: "Of the 100 prisoners you sent me, 18 died in transport. Only 12 are in conditions suitable for my experiments. I therefore request that you send me another 100 prisoners between the ages of 20 and 40 years old who are in a healthy and physical condition comparable to soldiers. Hail Hitler, Professor Dr. E. Hagen." So this was proof that the Third Reich had been conducting medical experiments on healthy humans, which, while diabolical, was completely new info to the scientific community. In order to successfully unleash a biological weapon against an enemy, the attacking army had to have already created their own vaccine against the deadly pathogen it intended to spread. Considering that the document he was looking at was over a year old, Goudsmit wondered how much progress the Nazis made with that vaccine since. What further troubled him was that Hagen had once been a physician dedicated to helping people, once being awarded a prestigious fellowship by the Rockefeller Foundation in New York City, where he had developed the world's first vaccine for yellow fever, and had even been a contender for the Nobel Prize. Now he was reading that this that this same doctor was testing deadly vaccines on healthy prisoners from concentration camps supplied to him by Himmler's SS, making him wonder if a leading doctor like that could be corrupted in that way. What else was going on here?
Goudsmit and his colleagues paid attention to the names of those Hagen corresponded with and began compiling a list of names of the Nazi scientists who were top priority for them to locate, capture, and interview. Hagen would never be a paperclip scientist, however, as he would end up fleeing to Russia following the war and would begin working for them.
Little bitch.
Little bitch. Little bitch-ass punk-ass. Mm-hmm. That said, two important names for Operation Paperclip would be discovered in those documents. Dr. Kurt Blom and Walter Schreiber, Deputy Surgeon General and Surgeon General of the Third Reich, respectively. Blom was in charge of the Third Reich's biological weapons programs, and Dr. Schreiber was in charge of its vaccines, the Sword and Shield.
The Sword. It is a sword.
Did I say short? Fuck me.
No, it's fine. Just leave it. Yeah, just keep going.
Yet again, before Hitler rose to power, both men had been internationally renowned physicians. Had Nazi science made these men turn to the dark side as well?
Maybe. A few weeks later, in Germany, a castle called Varlar was being readied for a celebration. In the cold December evening, Army technicians made last-minute adjustments to the platforms of portable rocket launch pads. On each of these pads sat a V-2 missile.
As we mentioned before, the objective of Operation Paperclip was to recruit German scientists for U.S. government employment. Many were former members and some were former leaders of the Nazi Party.
The man at the center of the invention of the V-2 was a 32-year-old aristocrat and wunderkind physicist named Werner von Braun.
Werner von Braun, who was a German aerospace engineer and, in his words, the founder and guiding spirit of the lethal V-2 rocket, which...
What a blowhard. Sorry, what a blowhard, dude. Jesus. But continue, sorry.
Which was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile, and a weapon which devastated England during World War II. According to historian Norman Davies, von Braun was able to pursue a career as a rocket scientist in Germany due to a curious oversight in the Treaty of Versailles, which did not include rocketry in its list of weapons forbidden to Germany.
He also kind of sounded like he was a man of an inflated ego. But, I mean, I get he was...
You sure? In Nazi Germany? A Nazi scientist in Nazi Germany? You think he had an inflated ego?
It's possible. The giant V-2 rocket was the most advanced flying rocket ever created. It was 46 feet long and carried a warhead filled with up to 2,000 pounds of explosives in its nose cone. It could travel 190 miles at up to 5 times the speed of sound. Its earlier version, the V-1 bomb, had been inflicting terror on all of Europe since June 1944, and this upgrade was faster and more fearsome. These rockets could not be shot down from the sky due to their altitude and speed, and the reverberations spread up to 20 miles. Over time, the threat of these weapons became known as Nazi wonder weapons or Wunderwaffe. Plans to evacuate over 1 million civilians in London were put in place, and England issued 4.3 million gas masks to its city dwellers.
Werner von Braun was there along with a handful of other scientists at the castle that night to receive one of Hitler's most coveted non-combat decorations, the Knight's Cross of the War Service Cross.
Okay, goons. That sounds dumb as hell, but it's what it is.
Essentially, actually reading that, I was like, wait, is that correct? Because it sounds... okay.
Yeah.
Essentially, all these Nazis were attending the celebration of great pomp and circumstance, and the biggest event of the evening was to watch them launch these V-2 rockets between war decorations, and everyone in attendance was very moved by it all.
Like to tears, some of them.
I'm
bombing people.
Vomit. I'm gonna vomit.
Yeah. Right.
Shortly thereafter, the U.S. Army put together a rocket branch with the mission of sending men over to Germany to capture the V-2 rockets and everything related to them to ship them back to the U.S. We were 20 years behind the Germans in rocket technology, and that was not going to stand.
So, the Third Reich had an underground armament production facility at Mittelwerk, where ordinary citizens of France, Belgium, Holland, Italy, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Russia, Poland, and Germany worked as their slaves. So essentially just everybody.
So Eastern Europe, okay.
Yeah, because they're all subhuman. Eventually, rocket production was also moved underground here, and the SS was in charge of supplying the slaves and overseeing the facility. A wrought iron sign above the entrance to the facility read, "Jedem Dasin, everyone gets what he deserves," which I was just like, youch, man. I mean, just talk about brutal bullshit, because you know that the people saying this were little bitches, you know. Like they couldn't have lived a day here, you know. So
the man in charge of transforming Mittelwerk from a mine to a system of tunnels was Brigadier General Hans Kammler, who earlier in his career built the gas chambers at Auschwitz, so he was a real piece of garbage.
Right.
They feared the prisoners would revolt if given mining tools, so they were forced to dig these tunnels with their bare hands.
Holy shit.
Dude. The man in charge of production at Mittelwerk was a man named Arthur Randolph, who would later become a very important asset of Operation Paperclip.
Cool. What Randolph lacked in education, he made up for in being a slave driver. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts 7 days a week, putting together V-weapons once the underground facilities were complete. Within the first 2 months, they had 8,000 men living and working in the cramped underground space with no water, washing facilities, or sanitation. The slaves died from starvation, dysentery, pleurisy, which is where the lining of your lungs become inflamed, pneumonia, tuberculosis, and phlegmasia from beatings, which I don't really understand. I think that was like, it's like such severe bruising that you die, something like that. Like you're just beat to death. Basically is what it is. Some died from ammonia burns to the lungs, others from being crushed by the weight of the rocket parts that they were forced to carry. Workers who were slow on production lines were beaten to death. Insubordinates were garroted or hanged. After the war crimes investigators determined that approximately half of the 60,000 men brought to work there had been worked to death. Mittelwerk was not the only slave labor camp by far. By 1939, the SS had masterminded a vast network of state-sponsored slavery through an innocent-sounding division called the SS Business Administration Office. And they were responsible for engineering fast and dangerous construction projects. Himmler had said, "Pay no attention to human victims." By December of 1944, slave laborers were dying by the thousands, and V-2 rockets were crashing into civilian centers across Europe. Yet, less than a year later, Rudolf, Ricky, probably not, but von Braun and Major General Dornberger had a bunch of other rocket engineers were headed to work for the U.S. government.
So, George Rickey was brought to America as a part of Operation Paperclip. He was charged with war crimes in 1947. However, he was acquitted and returned back to the U.S., where he continued his work. Another paperclip scientist, Hubertus Strughold, was linked by written evidence to medical experiments at Dachau, but faced no charges.
Just basically like, forgive and forget if we need you.
Cool.
Bad enough.
Exactly.
Yeah. Once it became clear that the war was lost, there was widespread destruction of evidence that began on all levels of trying to destroy all of the Third Reich's everything, essentially, about anything that they were doing. Over at Auschwitz, for a second, for a bit, kind of a very gloss over background of Auschwitz, it consisted of 3 separate camps. There was the first one, the main camp. The second one was the Birkenau gas chambers and crematorium. And the third camp was a labor concentration camp run by the chemical giant IG Farben. They called this division of their company IG Auschwitz. Life expectancy of the workers there was 3 months.
Holy fuck.
So you go there knowing you're going to probably be dead in 3 months.
For sure.
From working to death and not being fed or taken care of. Everybody was kind of panicking and fleeing the scene of the crime, but there was plenty of evidence, bodies, etc., to destroy, and there were a few trusty sociopaths who were down for the job. Upon realizing the war was over, it became standard operating procedure to move and destroy all evidence at laboratories, research facilities, and armament factories across the Reich. Chemist Dr. Otto Ambros was one of these socios who stayed around to destroy everything. His official title was Managing Director of Fuel Production at Auschwitz. He had invented synthetic rubber for the Reich, and tank trucks and planes all used this rubber, and it was so important to their ability to wage war that he was awarded 1 million Reichsmarks by the Fuhrer. He traveled around to various Farben factories, destroying all the evidence there. At one of these facilities called Deinfurth, Farben produced chemical weapons, which are deadly nerve agents on an industrial scale.
In my research, I read on Smithsonian.com that the U.S. had no idea that Hitler had created this whole arsenal of nerve agents. They had no idea Hitler was working on a bubonic plague weapon, and that's really where Paperclip began, which was suddenly the Pentagon realizing, wait a minute, we need these weapons for ourselves. Why? Why does the Pentagon need those types of weapons for the good of the U.S.?
I think it's just like, oh, we don't want you to have them. We need to have them if you're going to have them, and we definitely don't want you to have them. I think it was more like, oh, shit.
Right.
Yeah, it was an oh, shit
If you
moment.
have it, we need it.
Yeah.
Like a toddler.
But also, you know, I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of people that are like, you don't know what we need and why we need it, you bitch. You know, like for our
That's true.
What is the damn word that we talk about so often? National security. So I know there would be people that are like, well, you don't know what we need, which might be right. But at the same time, like, you also have to, I don't know, maybe you don't, but you have to look at it from like a human perspective. And what are you willing to do in order to have access to this? Is it sacrificing a few for the greater good? I don't know. It seems pretty awful.
It's just at what point, when are we sacrificing too much for our safety? Because, I mean, with everything, we're constantly being monitored, and we pretty much all know that. There's literal memes on Instagram about, oh, my FBI agent watching me, doing this, and it's like some silly bullshit. But, I mean, we pretty much know that is
it
exactly
happened. Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah, for sure. So, all right, let's move on. Let's move on a little bit. So, Deinfurth was a large complex of underground bomb-proof bunkers and had a workforce of 560 white-collar Germans and over 3,000 slave laborers. They had been mass-producing liquid tabin, a deadly nerve agent whose existence was unknown to the outside world for 3 years. Tabin was one of Hitler's most guarded secrets, a truly diabolical weapon. It was similar to a pesticide and one of the most deadly substances in the world. One tiny drop on the skin could kill an individual in seconds, at the most, minutes.
It sounds like ricin.
I don't know anything about it.
Fair enough.
Sorry. But I'm sure it does. Maybe it's similar. I don't really know.
Ricin is a super deadly nerve agent. When I was in the military, we had to do, I worked for like hazmat, the hazmat. And that was one of like the scariest things because there's nothing you can do.
Dude.
Yeah.
Who has this stuff? How do you
derive
it? Ugh. Okay, well.
Exposure of tabin caused the glands and muscles to hyperstimulate, and the respiratory system would fail. Paralysis would set in, and breathing would stop. At the plant where accidents clearly happened, a human's death by tabin gas was likened to the frenetic last moments of a bug sprayed with insecticide.
That's terrifying.
And here at Deinfurth, IG Farben worked to fill aerial bombs with tabin so that they could be deployed from Luftwaffe planes.
Cool. They had enough poison to decimate the population of London or Paris on any given day, but Hitler had not given in to many of his ministers' wishes to deploy them on the Allies. Despite the fact that there were Red Army troops swarming the area, Hitler was determined to keep the tabin secrets out of the enemy hands, and a force of several hundred soldiers staged a raid on the Russians, who were celebrating their victory at the Deinfurth Castle. I find that to be very interesting. It's almost like he wanted to guard a secret so much that he didn't kill everybody. Like, that's really weird, That's so strange. Also among these men were 82 scientists and technicians, and the whole goal of this mission that they were performing was to protect these men while they scrubbed the facility of any evidence of what they had been doing there with the tabin. As with at Auschwitz, Otto Ambros had overseen every element of this chemical weapons facility from the very beginning.
Another man who played an important role in the Third Reich's chemical weapon advancements was SS Brigadier Fuhrer Dr. Walter Schreiber. A chemist by training and a hardcore Nazi ideologue, Schreiber, as you can imagine, was a super stellar person.
A real winner. A delight.
A delight. Schreiber had been in charge of gas mask production, which was imperative if the SS troops were to wage biological warfare. In doing this, they tested the masks on concentration camp prisoners, and the stories that were told during the Nuremberg trials were fucking ghoulish.
These stories included locking prisoners in glass rooms and spraying them with nerve agent. And later, war crimes investigators would debate if this was done as a pilot program of sorts for the gas chambers. As these men scrub-a-dub-dubbed the facility, the soldiers downriver launched artillery shells at sleeping Russian forces as a diversionary attack. The battle lasted just long enough for I.G. Farber's technical team to get in, clean the place of any evidence of Tabun, and completely disappear. This facility wasn't discovered by the Red Army for days following this, and by that point, there was absolutely no sign of life or death or Tabun in the facility, and they knew whatever had gone on there had to be incredibly important to the Reich. The Russians dismantled, crated, and sent the factory back to Russia for future investigation, and the Tabun production that had been done there remained a mystery to them until about a year later when they reassembled it in a little town, Beketovka, outside Stalingrad. Then they too began producing Tabun on an industrial scale, but we had some ground to cover here.
So at the same time the U.S. was trying to get Nazi scientists for our own purposes, the USSR was doing the same and then started creating the same nerve agents. Perfect. Cool. Super.
Yeah.
So because we had to have weapons supremacy over the USSR, at this time, right after 2 back-to-back world wars, it seemed that our government decided on behalf of the American people that the ends do justify the means. Now, the thing is, the U.S. government knew that our people would be opposed to this action, and in fact, many members of the government were also opposed to the idea of hiring Nazis to further our scientific advances. I mean, day by day, new information was coming out regarding the absolute heinous atrocities associated with the war, and we were learning about the Holocaust.
Right. At the end of the war, Hitler had issued a scorched earth policy, which I'm sure we've all heard before. But what this meant was that they were completely demolishing Reich territory to destroy all of Germany infrastructure, both military and civilian. And Hitler wanted nothing to be left for the weak losers, quote unquote, that would be around after the fall of the Third Reich. Because he really did think that if you were left behind, that you were a little bitch, is what he said. It just worthless.
Stupid.
Yeah. Says this little puss in boots. I don't know what to say. Okay. So I didn't want to call him a pussy because I didn't want to insult the puss that way. Okay, so while everything was crumbling around them, the Nazis were still plugging away, making rockets at the Nordhausen-Dora concentration camp, where conditions were absolutely ghastly. There were cramped prisoners surviving off watery broth and abusive working conditions. They continued to slave away at an increasingly furious pace, producing more and more V-weapons. Prisoners arrived daily from Auschwitz and Gross-Rosen camps by the droves, often dead. And von Braun continued to push and push for the frenzied production of these rockets to increase.
So von Braun vehemently denied any and all knowledge of the conditions the prisoners endured, but clearly if he did know about Nordhausen, JOIA 100% ensured that it was removed from his history.
Sure, he had been there a bajillion times. He had literally been there a bajillion times.
I know.
Yeah.
We're going to get into that in a second.
Okay. The conditions worsened for the slave laborers, and an increasing number died as the days passed. The deteriorating condition of the slave labor as a whole began to show when deployed rockets began breaking apart in midair, even on their launch pads all over Europe. Managers, suspecting sabotage, issued public hangings that were carried out over the V-2 production lines. Prisoners were forced to watch the slow and agonizing death of their fellow prisoners because they were being worked to death under like the absolute most heinous conditions, and the rockets somehow were in tip-top production shape.
Weird. That's so
Yeah.
strange. You know, here's the thing. Okay, so I'm just trying to if I die doing it, my fellow prisoners are going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I do it and it is not good enough because I'm
Dying.
being worked to death, I'm going to die. I mean, there's death any way you slice or dice it. So back to von Braun, he admitted that he had visited the plant at Mittelwerk in Nordhausen on many occasions. This particular factory was built underground to avoid Allied forces bombing their location, and like we said, used slave labor from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. He did call the conditions at the plant repulsive, but he claimed never to have witnessed any deaths or beatings.
You fake ass bitch.
Although,
sorry.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Although it had become clear to him by 1944 that deaths had occurred. Again, the inmates were treated in a brutal and inhumane manner, working 14-hour days and being denied access to basic hygiene, beds, and adequate rations. Around 1 in 3 of the roughly 60,000 prisoners who were sent to Dora Mittelbau died. Some prisoners claim that von Braun not only engaged in brutal treatment, but even approved of it.
I'm sure.
Guy Morand, a French resistance fighter and a prisoner in Dora, testified in 1995 that after an apparent sabotage attempt, von Braun ordered a prisoner to be flogged, while Robert Casabon, another French prisoner, claimed von Braun stood by as prisoners were hanged by chains suspended by cranes.
Ugh.
Additionally, former Buchenwald inmate Adam Kabbalah claims that von Braun went to the concentration camp to pick up slave laborers.
He stated that also the German scientists led by Professor Werner von Braun were aware of everything daily. As they went along the corridors, they saw the exhaustion of the inmates, their arduous work, and their pain. Not one single time did Professor von Braun protest against this cruelty during his frequent stays at Dora. Even the aspect of corpses did not touch him. On a small area near the ambulance shed, inmates tortured to death by slave labor and the terror of the overseers were piling up daily. But von Braun passed them so close that he was almost touching the corpses.
Von Braun later claimed that he was aware of the treatment of prisoners, but he felt helpless to change the situation. So I mean, which story do you want to go with? Is it you didn't know, or is it that you felt helpless? Because you got to pick one.
Yeah, you got to pick one. I'm kind of surprised that stupid bitch was even willing to act like he felt helpless about anything. You know what? He's like such a blowhard, big-headed bitch, and then now he's like, but I couldn't do a thing. I'm like, okay, shut up.
So, for some additional background on the absolutely honest, straightforward, courageous type of person that he was.
Okay, sarcasm intended.
Records show that von Braun, on the 12th of November 1937, applied for membership of the Nazi Party. He later lied shockingly and said, quote, "In 1939, I was officially demanded to join the National Socialist Party." He went on to say that he was already the technical director at the Army Rocket Center in Peenemünde. Thus, my refusal to join the party would have meant I would have to abandon the work of my life.
Oh. So, while all this is going on, he was finally able to concede that the Nazis were going to lose the war, but he wasn't willing to lose his prestigious career. Mm-hmm. He instructed 2 of his subordinates to take the... Oh, okay. So earlier we spoke about those documents of Himmler's that had been discovered and were like the greatest cache of information that was ever discovered in one place in the war. And this is where von Braun had taken these documents with like a secret squad of men that he blindfolded and took in a car to take him to this cave where they put these documents in this cave, and then they dynamited the outside so that you couldn't tell, you were supposed to not be able to tell that this was going on here, that it was just some innocent cave. But turns out those documents were found, and that's where we learned about all that medical information regarding the experiments that they were doing, the doctors who were doing it. So this is just another little... I guess there's like it's a incongruent situation, I guess. Okay, let me think what I'm trying to say. He's a little bitch. He went and hid these documents, and then they found these documents that he had hidden, and yet that detail horrible shit, and yet he's like one of the top goddamn people that we brought over here to work with us, even though he did all of this stuff to hide all that information from us, and then did all this heinous shit to begin with, and then we're just like sucking his Von Braun dick.
His Von Schlong.
Now, during this time, the British and Americans had joined forces under the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee to hunt down and capture these top scientific minds of the Third Reich. I wonder what happens if they don't have some 9 million word long committee name. It just doesn't work.
That was
what's
loud.
the deal? As soldiers pushed through Europe, they were joined by over 3,000 scientific and technical experts. These men worked off lists of targets that they dubbed blacklists.
Men in the field would send requests for specific groups of PSYOPs agents, and they would be dispatched to the field. Their job was to recognize potentially scientific targets and secure them. This was to say it was anything related to German science whatsoever, from missiles to medicine to biological weapons.
They wanted all of it. Give me it all. At this time, there were many independent agencies competing for the same information, using the PSYOPs blacklist to help them do so, because it was published out in the open for some reason. And it was generally a chaotic situation, as they were all working with their own goals, objectives, and methods, so it was just pretty much a shitstorm of people hunting down these scientists. What had eventually started as a joint effort among the Allies turned into one of the most serious competitions for information about weapons-related research in the entire war. At some point, Operation Alsos was given a list of the Reich's top scientists that professors at a university tried to flush down the toilet, but failed to do so, and they were found by a student in the bathroom. And that was like the most valuable list of scientists, apparently, and it would just, the Reich had done as much as they could to delete their own documents, but they kind of forgot about some of the little offshoots. So, like, some of these professors that knew some stuff about this information and had been instructed to get rid of the evidence, what did they care? They were just trying to save their own asses, so they were trying to flush like a notebook down the toilet. It doesn't work out, but it worked out for giving us the information, or the U.S.
So when Allied forces secured Bonn University, which is about 15 miles south of Cologne, a Polish lab technician approached a British soldier to say that he had salvaged a large pile of docs that didn't properly flush down the toilet, as had been intended. The soldier looked over the papers and discovered that they were extremely important. The tech had handed him a list of the Reich's top scientists. This list would eventually become known as the Ausenberg list. Ausenberg was a mechanical engineer and member of the SS. He was also a high-ranking member of the secret police, the Gestapo, and was assigned by Hermann Göring, who was commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe and one of the most powerful figures in the Nazi Party. He was assigned to run the planning office of the Reich Research Council, and a decree for the council's charter read, "Leading men of science above all are to make research fruitful for warfare by working together in their special fields."
Sounds nice.
I mean,
Sounds
again,
nice.
I don't know. The book that we were reading even mentioned that there's mystery surrounding how this list ended up at Bonn University, and the mystery has never been solved. So we don't really know why the list itself was there, but perhaps these scientists were using this university as a place to educate future Nazi experimenters or technicians or whatever.
Yeah. Or maybe they were, kind of doing little offshoot experiments there. Maybe they're not the more serious ones. But
so this list not only contained names and a record of who was working for the Third Reich, but their addresses as well, including one for Ausenberg himself, the intelligent man that he was. Ausenberg was captured along with his complete outfit, and his office proved to also be invaluable. There were about 2,000 large 10x7 printed cards which contained information on how to piece together how science programs worked under the Reich and who had been in charge.
What? Is this like his own? He was carrying out this own little mission on the side that was just like eventually gonna just fuck them hard. Okay, cool.
Fucking
good,
perfect.
actually. Way to go, dummy.
Sorry. So in March 1945, about a month before Germany surrendered, Austenberg was put to work in Paris for the Allies to begin organizing information. He repeatedly tried convincing his captors that he had sworn loyalty to the Allies. And when accused of burning all evidence of his actions, he said, "No, I didn't burn those papers, I buried them. Moreover, I was not the chief of the scientific section of the Gestapo, I was merely second in command." Even though he had been in charge of tracking down and cataloging a list of over 15,000 scientists, engineers, and technicians to work on weapons-related research programs in service of the war effort, but okay. This information about burying docs made it easy to find out where the papers were buried and stored, though. So this is about a month before Germany's surrender. So Berlin was being extremely fiercely defended, and nobody from the Allied forces was going to go to Berlin just yet.
Okay, so all across Germany, liberations were beginning, and prisoners in concentration and labor camps were being freed by Allied soldiers. One American soldier, John Risen Jones, explained that entering the slaves' tunnels in Nordhausen traumatized him to the point that he would not speak of it for 41 years. He said dead bodies, emaciated, bruised, unable to move, live humans, they were a fabric of moans, whimpers, delirium, and outright madness. He said 4 people were dying every hour. And the job facing the war crimes investigators was obviously enormous. All the info on rocket production had been destroyed, but a list of who was in charge was left tacked on a wall. At the very top of that list was a couple of dudes that we've already talked about, Arthur Rudolph and George Rickey. Dr. Kurt Blome was near the top of the biological weapons blacklist. So these guys that we are already all up in their guts, they are at the top of these lists of people that were doing this research that is absolutely horrible. But they were also the greatest possessors of knowledge, apparently. So which one's more important? On April 13th, 1945, American soldiers discovered a 70-building compound that the Reich had taken great care to conceal, with trees, gardens, storks' nests on the roof. It just looked unassuming as hell from the air. And inside the compound were warehouses filled with state-of-the-art airplane parts and rocket fuel. There were wind and weapons tunnels that were radically more advanced than anything the Americans had. They had unexpectedly stumbled across the most scientifically advanced aeronautics laboratory in the world, the Hermann Göring Aeronautical Research Center at Vulcanroad. This was not on any SIOS blacklist. It was just a lucky as hell find.
They used some stripped-down bomber planes to transport the laboratory and all its contents, and Major General Nair thought they should kill 2 birds with 1 stone and bring some of the scientists over with it. He sent a memo to the War Department in D.C. explaining that using Luftwaffe technology to fight the war against Japan was imperative. He added that the scientists' Nazi Party membership needed to be overlooked as, quote, pride and face saving, have no plan in national insurance.
Okay, sure.
But at the time, the War Department wasn't really having it and told him to make do with the lab itself and keep them all Nazis in Europe.
At that point, Nur and Colonel Putt, who was in charge of modifying a B-29 bomber so that they could deliver the nuclear bomb to Hiroshima, decided to put their heads together to figure out how to convince the War Department to let them bring the Nazis over to work for them and how that would be best for the United States. Around this time, the Allied forces found the single largest nuclear weapons cache to date on a 60-square-mile piece of forested land just outside Hanover, Germany. An unexpected surprise came when they discovered the zoo inside of it, and in the middle of that zoo was a nearly 70-foot chamber with tubes and a ventilation system, and it was pretty clear to them that it was an aerosol chamber.
This bore the hallmarks of a large-scale field testing facility, likely involving poison gas. Nearby, more soldiers found bunkers of over 200 structures, just filled to the brim with 100,000 bombs stacked in neat piles, marked with a single yellow ring, denoting that they were filled with mustard gas. Then there were 175 bunkers filled with bombs that were unidentifiable, marked with 3 green rings.
They tested the unknown contents, which they suspected to be a blistering agent, on test rabbits, and found that whatever was in the bombs killed the rabbits at a rate 5 times faster than anything either the British or Americans had ever seen or heard about. Even more disturbing, the substance didn't have to be inhaled to kill. It simply had to be applied in one small drop on the rabbit skin. And this is what we had talked about earlier, the tabun.
Mm-hmm.
So like we said, at that point, no chemical known to man had ever been developed like this before. And we didn't even know these motherfuckers had that shit.
The fact that these weapons had never been used was astonishing. And all the Allies knew was that they wanted to get their dirty mitts on the scientists that developed them.
The first Nazi concentration camp was established in Dachau in 1933 by Himmler, and it was initially set up as a place to send political enemies of socialism, which was the ideology of the Nazis. The name came from the fact that prisoners could be concentrated in groups and held under protective custody following Nazi law. Himmler had quickly made these camps legally independent administrative units outside the penal code and the ordinary law. So just essentially changing the laws to make their sick shit legal, quote-unquote legal. Dachau had served as a training ground for thousands of SS concentration camp guards and was a model for how all other concentration camps were set up, along with being a model for how Nazi medical research with physicians would eventually be conducted. When Allied forces were sent to try and do what they could for the 32,000 prisoners at Dachau in the days following the liberation, they found that these 32,000 people were starved, suffering from tuberculosis, typhus, pneumonia, dysentery, scabies, and other infectious diseases in the early, middle, and late phases. Even the Hardin County Hospital doctors cracked at the horror of the situation.
One man, Dr. Smith, says while exploring the mostly destroyed facilities, he found perfect intact bottles of human and insect tissues. He was told by prisoners that the doctors would experiment on prisoners without consent. What Dr. Smith had just realized, even before the British and American intelligence, is that Dachau was the place where the Nazis were conducting medical research on humans.
The work performed at Cell Block 5, as it was called, was science without conscience. It was bad science for bad ends. And later, in Operation Paperclip, they would use this exact same model for their research here in the United States. I turned into, what's that guy's name?
Sean Connery.
Sean Connery. Not only that, but 6 of the doctors conducting the human experiments in Dachau were the very first doctors that got contracts with the U.S. through Operation Paperclip. So, you know, we have just the moral convictions of a televangelist.
Oof. So the director of IG Farben, Hermann Schmitz, was discovered by Allied troops in his modest home. And I just really wanted to make a quick mention. IG Farben's contributions to the war included not only Hitler's precious tabun gas, but also the manufacturing of the poison gas Zyklon B, which is what was used to kill millions of victims in the gas chambers during the Holocaust.
Yeah, so they're just basically they're just a little Nazi chemical company.
Mm-hmm. They discovered a safe filled with IG Farben docs, but nothing too incredibly damning until an officer went to him in his office and began asking him random questions while tapping the walls all around the room until he found that one sound was a little inconsistent.
At one point, this piece of garbage, concentration camp running Nazi motherfucker, seriously started crying. There, they found a safe with a photo album detailing what had happened at the concentration camps from inception. That's from his knocking around on the walls. I mean, that's pretty genius. So when the fighting between the Allies and Germany had stopped, they had to make the transition, the Allies, from being a conquering army to an occupying force. The objective was to disarm, demilitarize, and denazify Germany so that their ability to wage war would be infinitesimal. World War I had ended with a peace treaty that, among other things, aimed to prevent the rise of German air power by preventing powered flight. Obviously, that turned out disastrously, as they had surpassed everyone else by leaps and bounds and had the most powerful air force in the world. And I know that obviously they wanted to prevent that from happening again with what they were doing following World War II.
So on June 20th, 1945, the U.S. approved the transfer of von Braun and his specialists to the U.S. after his detainment at the Dustbin Interrogation Center at Kranzberg Castle. This was Hermann Göring's former Luftwaffe headquarters, and where the elite of the Third Reich's economic, scientific, and technological sectors were debriefed by the U.S. and British intelligence officials. Housed in Kranzberg Castle, Dustbin was a medieval structure within the mountains with, quote, grand rooms, hardwood floors, beautiful stone fireplaces, and shiny chandeliers. The prisoners, and that's in quotes, the quote-unquote prisoners here, who were top chemists and scientists of the Nazi Party, which included more than 20 chemists with IG Farben and at least 6 members of its board, also were free to chat with one another and roam around the grounds, lending to the fact that although these people committed heinous, unforgivable crimes, and again, they're all weasels out for their best interests, I'm sure they were spending their time corroborating their stories and not being punished as they should have been.
Right, and they were literally like eating cheese plates. And among some of the scientists housed at Dustbin was a Farben chemist named Dr. Gerhard Schrader. Schrader was the man who created the nerve agent that had been found at Robkammer.
Although the information he had was among the most sought-after information available, he offered everything he knew very freely in his interrogations. I also read in this book that British intelligence and scientists were the first to interview him in depth, and they were eager to gain information that they knew U.S. officials would deny them.
Dr. Schrader had been working at an insecticide lab for IG Farben. Because weevils and leaf lice were destroying grain across Germany, he was tasked with the important job of creating a synthetic pesticide to eradicate these pests. Because the government was spending 30 million Reichsmarks a year on pesticides by Farben and other companies, Farben wanted to develop something that could, 1, save money for the Reich, and 2, ensure that they had a monopoly on pesticides.
His work as a chemist was trial and error work, and obviously because of this, extremely labor-intensive and dangerous. Because he was a family man, he took many stringent precautions against exposure to the chemicals he used, including always working under a fume hood. Even with these precautions, he often suffered from headaches and sometimes felt shortness of breath.
One night, while driving home after working on a new product, Schrader could barely see the road in front of him. When he pulled over to examine his eyes in the mirror, he saw that his pupils had constricted to the size of a pinhead. Over the next several days, his vision grew worse. He developed a throbbing pressure in his larynx. Finally, Schrader checked himself into a hospital where he was monitored for 2 weeks before being sent home and told to rest. 8 days after his 2-week stint in the hospital, he returned back to work on the project he had given the code name Preparation 991. He picked up right where he left off and prepared a small amount of his new substance, diluting it to 1 in 200,000 units. To his shock, it killed 100% of the lice on the leaves he tested it on.
Dr. Schrader sent a sample of this lethal new fumigant to Farben's director of industrial hygiene, Professor Eberhard Gross, who tested the substance on apes. After a healthy ape was injected with a tiny amount of Preparation 991, just 1/10 of a milligram per kilo of body weight, the ape died in less than an hour.
Yikes.
Next, Gross tested the substance on an ape inside an inhalation chamber. He watched this healthy ape die in 16 minutes. At Dustbin, Schrader told Major Tilly that when he learned his compound could kill a healthy ape through airborne contact in minutes, he became upset. His discovery was never going to be used as an insecticide, Schrader lamented. It was simply too dangerous for any warm-blooded animal or human to come in contact with. Schrader said his goal was to save money for the Reich, but with the news of how powerful Preparation 991 was, Schrader felt he'd failed at his job. He got back to work searching for a fumigant better suited for the task of killing weevils and leaf lice. Do you think this was like a real case of just doing what you can for your country and your work being used for evil, Ash?
Well, I don't know, because, I mean, it sounds like he's trying... No, I think he's lying, because they're all trying to cover their asses.
Okay.
Do you really think he didn't know he is the director of IG Farben?
I don't think he wasn't the director. He just had been working at an insecticide lab for IG Farben.
Okay. Well, I don't know. It seems like hard to believe that you don't know what's going on at these places, but maybe you don't. Maybe you really don't. I'm sorry, I don't have anything good to say.
No worries. I wanted to ask you because I was curious about what you thought of that.
He seems to be slightly compelling in his, saying that he didn't mean for that to be the outcome and that he was upset about it, but he could just be lying.
Yeah.
Who knows?
So on July 6, 1945, in a classified memorandum which President Truman was not made aware of, the Joint Chiefs of Staff finally approved on paper a Nazi scientist program. The governing body that had been assigned to exercise general supervision over the program was the Military Intelligence Division of the War Department.
A part of the memorandum stated no known or alleged war criminals should be brought to the United States, and that the purpose of this plan should be understood to be temporary military exploitation of the minimum number of German specialists necessary. According to its initiative, as soon as the jobs were completed, the specialists would be returned to Europe. I kind of feel like that was the public statement, and then the private statement was something else.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Hereover, participants would be referred to as eminent German specialists instead of German scientists, as not all the Nazis being requested for approval had degrees in science.
Alongside scientists were Nazi bureaucrats, businessmen, accountants, and lawyers. At this point was when Operation Overcast was coined, and Paperclip wouldn't be used for about 8 more months. Furthermore, requests from military agencies that were interested in hiring German specialists were to request, quote, only the most compelling arguments to bring a German specialist to this country. The initiative stated only the chosen rare minds whose continuing intellectual productivity we wish to use would be approved.
Which is why the tip top got taken in as workers, and then we sent the rest to jail that were just like little peons.
A list of desired German scientists, which was named List 1, accompanied the memo. It included 115 rocket specialists. When the British learned about the U.S. Army's intentions to hire the German rocket scientists, they asked to be first allowed to conduct 2 rocket exploitation projects of their own. The Americans agreed, we agreed, and released into British custody a group of scientists, engineers, and technicians, including Werner von Braun, Walter Dornberger, and Arthur Rudolph. Following the arrival of the first large group of scientists in the United States, a suitable press release would be generated by the War Department to avoid possible resentment on the part of the American public.
Yeah, suitable press release. Yeah, that's exactly. I just got ahead, didn't I? What's new?
Yeah, no, but that's fine. I mean, exactly what's new.
Well, there's always the what's released for public consumption, and then what is the actual real story.
Right. So, did you want to go into anything else?
Nope.
Okay. So, on part 2, we're going to definitely delve further into this absolute rabbit hole and discuss British intelligence and their projects involving Nazi scientists and dive to exactly what the U.S., what we did with these evil people.
Yeah.
And real quick, I wanted to just make note that the information that we gathered for this was from the book Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought Nazi scientists to America by Annie Jacobsen. I found information on history.com, CIA.gov, and Conspiracies and Secret Societies, the complete dossier by Brad Steiger and Sherry Steiger. I don't know.
Okay. So next week we'll definitely be just talking about how we use the scientists and doctors. I'm fairly positive that while we weren't, completely committing genocide and killing just thousands of people in concentration camps and using them as prisoners, that we had some insidious shit going down with these guys over here. Mm-hmm. So there's that. Discussing what is the appropriate cost for this kind of progress in research and development for medical and scientific purposes. Just the truly terrible stuff we did, and the legacy that this project in this Operation Paperclip left behind. But thanks for listening. I know this is a very dense topic. This is why,
Super heavy.
It's why we took a little bit longer to get this episode out to you this week, but you're gonna have you're gonna have part 2 coming sooner than 2 weeks from now, and it will be out. It'll be out sooner than 2 weeks. That's what I'm gonna say to you. And then after that, we're starting our big time gear up for super creepy Halloween stuff.
If anybody has any suggestions on what maybe they'd like us to cover, paranormal stuff, murders, or whatever, feel free to message us.
Super spooky ideas are welcome. Just send them over. We have, quite a few ideas, but also for like specifics. If there's a case, like some sort of haunting or like paranormal situation that you want to hear more about, or maybe you've heard about before, but you want our consistent deep dive. We consistently deep dive our topics. So if there's something that you want a little more information on that you've heard somewhere else, we could also do that. But send us all your ideas, and maybe you'll get to be a little bit of a producer of the show. All right. Well, thanks for listening to this story of Nazi fuckheads.
This has been one.
Hopefully you understand why we went into, such a topic, and I don't know. Like, we really wanted you to get a good grasp of the depravity of the Third Reich and its science and medical practices, so that you can understand why whenever I learned that we brought them over here, I was like, what the fuck are you talking about right now? Mm-hmm. Anyway, so thanks for listening. We'll talk to you later. Go check us out on Instagram and CreeperRealPod. Email creeperrealpod@gmail.com.
Also, if you could help us make the show grow a little bit more, that would be so incredibly amazing. I can't tell you how much we appreciate every 5-star review that we get, even if it isn't written. But we love to hear your written reviews, because it just feels like it's nice to hear that you're sitting there with us thinking that, being our friends.
Yeah, we're your friends. Also, not to scream in your ears, but also it would be great if you could share the podcast with people who you feel would appreciate it as much as you do. So that's another way that you can help us grow, is just by sharing us with anybody that you feel would be into the Creep It Real ladies and what we present to you. Mm-hmm. So anyway, okay, bye. Have a good day. We'll see you later next week. All right, Creep It Real.